So moving on from the previous topic of privacy, we're going to be, slightly changing the angle and talking about free software. And we're very excited to have Dr. Richard Stallman on the line from Boston. He launched the free software movement in 1983, which is actually before half of you were born. And he's also known for starting the development of the GNU or GNU platform, which goes hand in hand with Linux. So,
can you really hear?
Yes. This is the volume of what you hear.
I know what this does.
Okay. So right now it's showing the slides. If you want to show yourself.
I can't hear it.
We can see you.
Okay, good. Tell me when I should start.
Please go ahead.
So, what's happening? Why does this not go back? How do I make this go back?
Here?
Oh, well, it's not.
If you click there.
Okay, now that works.
But it's
so I'm going to be speaking about free software and how it relates to our freedom and our privacy in the digital age. And I have 50 minutes, is that correct? Well, uh-oh.
Hi, Richard.
Yeah, it froze. Do I have 50 minutes? 50, is that correct? Or do I have an hour? I can't remember.
So on the schedule, we have you down for about 40 minutes. And then if you could leave,
okay, I'll have to rush. So, when I talk about free software, it's a matter of freedom, not price. Free software is software that respects users' freedom and community. That's why it's morally important. We are not talking about price. So think of free speech, not free beer. We don't mind if you sell copies of free software. In fact, that's part of the freedom it gives you to make copies and sell them. We aren't concerned particularly with whether you get a copy gratis or pay for it. We're concerned with something more important. Once you have a copy of the program, does it respect your freedom or take it away? So a computer just executes the instructions that come from the program. With the right instructions, the computer can do anything except the things that are impossible. So when it's frozen, is it frozen both ways? I don't know.
If you want them to see the slides, we need to enable it.
Oh, right, I've turned them off, yes. So, think of free speech, not free beer. The computer just executes instructions from the program, and with the right program, it'll do anything except some things that are impossible. So the question is, who gives the instructions to your computer? You might think it's you, when really it's someone else. You might think your computer obeys you, when really it always obeys its true master. And it only does what you ask for when the true master says it can. With any program, there are two possibilities. Uh-oh, it froze. Either the users control the program, or the program controls the users. It's always one or the other because there's no other way it can be. When the users control the program, that's free software. What is freedom? Freedom means having control of your own life, control of the activities you do in your life. But if you use a program to do the activity, that requires control of the activity requires control of the program. So when the users control the program, that program respects the user's freedom and community, and that means it's free software. Practically speaking, in order for the users to have control of the program, they need the 4 essential freedoms. So these 4 freedoms make the practical definition, the practical criterion for free software. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program any way you wish for any purpose. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the source code and change it so it does your computing activities the way you wish. Why is source code essential? Well, on the left you see some source code. It's a mixture of math and English. If you've learned the programming language, you can read that and understand what it does and see how to make it do something else. But in order to run it, we convert it to executable. You see that on the right. It's a series of enigmatic zeros and ones. If the program is super trivial, like this short, it's not that hard to figure out what the zeros and ones mean. Once it gets a bit bigger, then it becomes a real job to figure out what those zeros and ones mean. I see you haven't got the I can't tell whether you are seeing this or not. Well, I put up a slide of a much larger program of ones and zeros. It gets to be hard, and with a real program like millions of ones and zeros, figuring out what they mean is terribly hard. If we want users really to be able to change the program, we must insist that they get the real source code with the comments and so on. So I wonder if you're getting, finally it's updated. These 2 freedoms together give us separate control of the program, which means that I'm free to change my copies and you're free to change your copies. And that's essential but not enough, because most users are not programmers. They don't know how to understand or change source code, but they do deserve control of their computing. How can a non-programmer have that? Through collective control, which is the freedom to work with others to study and change the source code and make the program do what the group wants. At the top, we see a group of 3 users working together to change the program. The 2 on the right are touching the code. They're programmers. The one on the left is not touching the code. Maybe person doesn't know how to program, but in any case, does participate in the group's decisions about what changes to make. That's how non-programmers get to participate in control of what their software does. Those who cooperate this way are those who choose to. At the bottom, there are 2 other users who don't work with that group. But tomorrow, if they want to, they could start if they know about each other. It's up to them whether they cooperate. Collective control requires 2 more essential freedoms. Freedom 2 is to make exact copies and give or sell them to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is to make copies of your modified versions so as to give or sell them to others when you wish. And this enables the group to function. When one user in the group makes a modified version, person can exercise freedom 3 by making copies of that version and redistributing them to others. Then someone else that gets a copy through freedom 2 can make more copies and redistribute them. And they're all free to redistribute copies to the general public. A group doesn't have to have a formal existence. Whichever users are cooperating today, that's a group. So if the users have all 4 essential freedoms, then they have full control over the program, and therefore it's free software. But if one of those freedoms is missing or incomplete, then the users do not control the program. Instead, the program controls the users, and the owner controls the program. So that program is an instrument of unjust power, giving the developer power over those users. This is why every non-free program is an injustice. And once you become fully sensitive to the injustice of non-free programs, you'll join me in kicking them out of your life. For me, if someone invites me to do some practical thing, but I'd have to give up my freedom to do it by running a non-free program, I'm not willing to make a sacrifice of my freedom. My freedom's more important than doing whatever convenient or profitable thing it might be, because I demand freedom. So I say no to that non-free program. And that's the spirit that led me to develop the GNU system. I wanted to escape from non-free software. So every non-free program is an injustice because it gives the developer or owner power over the users. This is why you shouldn't ever develop non-free software. That's doing harm to the world. And you can't justify it by saying you need money. I mean, that's the same thing thieves say and corrupt politicians. But it's not a valid excuse for them, and it's not a valid excuse for non-free software developers either. But this basic injustice leads to other injustices, because nowadays the developers and owners, they know they're going to have power over the users. And before the program's even running, they start planning how they're going to take advantage of that power to mistreat the users for their own advantage by putting in malicious functionalities. It's typical nowadays for non-free software to be malware. What are these malicious functionalities? Well, sometimes they spy on people. This is how free software relates to privacy. This example is the Amazon Swindle, Amazon's ebook reader, which spies on the users and reports everything that the user does. It sends the title of the book. It sends the page number. If the user highlights any text or enters notes, that's all sent to Amazon. But this is just one example out of many. Somebody studied 5,000 popular Android apps, and more than half of them were spying in an obvious way that the investigator could detect. And as for the rest, some of them may have been spying in other ways that couldn't be detected by looking at the executables without the source code. So it's normal for non-free software to spy. It's not a rare scandal. That's what non-free software implies nowadays. All the successful proprietary operating systems spy. That's Windows, Mac OS, Android, iOS, and Chrome OS. And streaming apps, of course, spy on people because they make users identify themselves, and then they report what the user looked at and or listened to. Well, this is intolerable. Even if it weren't non-free software, I'd reject it if it did that. And then there is Uber, which makes users identify themselves and records where they go. Now that is the kind of surveillance that plays into the hands of dictatorship. So I will never be a customer of Uber. And because Uber is trying to destroy its competition, get rid of all other options such as ordinary taxis, we have to be proactive too. We have to fight Uber just the way Uber is fighting our freedom. And therefore, I refuse to ride in an Uber car, even if somebody else is booking the car. It's true, in that case, Uber wouldn't know that I'm there, wouldn't get any data about me. But I want to organize people to destroy Uber unless it respects our privacy by allowing anonymous booking and anonymous payment. Well, many products and services are tied to remote servers in the same way as Uber and Netflix. For instance, the Fitbit, it gets personal data and then transmits it over the net to the manufacturer's server. The manufacturer offers to sell the user per own personal data. How about that for extreme goal in mistreating people? But there are lots of things. In general, if something is called the, quote, Internet of Things, that means it's probably going to spy on whoever uses it. I'm not going to allow anything in my house that connects to the internet except for my computer, which I control because it's running free software. Anything that wants to talk to the internet and won't let you control it directly only through somebody else's server is designed to mistreat you. Of course, the first thing it does is spy. And they do this in ways that might shock people. There was a sex toy. Well, there still is, I suppose. There are sex toys that connect to the internet. And the idea is that your lover can send commands to the toy, which might be fun. But it works, it communicates with your lover through the manufacturer's server, which means it's spying on you. And it was discovered last year that one of these products was spying on the users by recording everything that was done. And they manufactured the product specifically for spying on people. They put a thermometer in the product. Now, why do you need a thermometer in a sex toy? Well, if you're the user, you don't need that. But the manufacturer wanted that so it could tell when the toy was in contact with the human body. And maybe they could also tell how much contact, what kind of contact. It wouldn't surprise me. So the whole idea of that product was to be malicious. But you should realize in advance, any product with non-free software in it that isn't controlled by the users and that talks over the internet is going to mistreat you. By the way, another thing that has happened several times is they shut off the server because they're no longer interested in that model of the product, and the users can't control them anymore. They only run to a limited extent in limited ways. I call that sabotage. But if you get a product that's designed that way, you're leaving yourself open for sabotage. Another malicious functionality is DRM, Digital Restrictions Management, or digital handcuffs. That's where they design the product to refuse to do the jobs users want to do. For instance, copy the data. This slide shows the infamous blue ray that attacks users when they want to copy data. Well, the rule I've made for myself is never to use any product that was designed to restrict me unless I have available in that moment whatever it takes to break the handcuffs and do whatever it is it was supposed to stop me from doing. So I don't have free software that can read the data off a Blu-ray disc. As far as I know, no one has ever completely implemented that. So I've never used a Blu-ray disc. And I'll never use a Blu-ray disc until I can do it with free software. I value my freedom more than all the movies in the world. And I hope you feel the same and that you'll do the same. Then there are backdoors. The Amazon Swindle has a backdoor for remotely erasing books. It's hard to detect that there's a backdoor in a non-free program. You can't study the source code. So in general, the way we find it out is by analyzing what the program does, by observation. In 2009, thousands of users of the Amazon Swindle discovered that Amazon had deleted their copies of a certain book. Thousands of copies in the same day. Some users saw the book disappear as they were in the middle of reading it. So this was a giant Orwellian act. And what was the book? It was 1984 by George Orwell. There was a lot of criticism, so Amazon said it would never do this again unless ordered to by the state. If you've read 1984, that's not a very comforting promise. But it wasn't a sincere promise either. It was just some noise Amazon could make to fool people and make the criticism disappear. A few years later, Amazon went back to remotely erasing books at a distance without even an order from the state. Many non-free programs have DRM. The successful proprietary operating systems all have features that are the basis for DRM in the apps. Now, a backdoor in a driverless car could be extremely dangerous because the state could send a command to take you, the passenger, to secret police headquarters, and you might never be seen again. They're already developing the remote control software. We're not just speculating that this problem might happen. It's being built already. We know they're going to implement remote control, and therefore we should never trust a driverless car run by non-free software that isn't being maintained and installed by people who won't cooperate with the state that way and who will make sure it doesn't have a backdoor. Now, we know that in China, they will do this. We don't know whether they'll do it in your country or my country, but we can't be sure that they won't. Then there is censorship. Apple was the pioneer designing a general purpose computer to censor applications. That was the iPhone. For the first time in a general purpose computer, users could not install any application program they wanted. They could only install the ones approved by Apple. Apple practiced the censorship power arbitrarily according to its business interests and its political stands until last year. Then China ordered Apple to block VPN applications, in other words, to censor for China. And Apple simply had to obey. Apple couldn't bear the sacrifice that would have been the sacrifice of money that would have been required to maintain its reputation for being something other than a tool of tyrants. So Apple said, "Oh, yes, of course, master." Well, we can speculate about which other countries Apple will start censoring for in the future. Turkey, maybe, Pakistan, Egypt, who knows? But the point is, if Apple had not implemented that censorship power for itself, then China could not have forced Apple to censor for China. Apple would have had a response to make, but China, we don't control what users install. They do what they want to do. We just can't do what you want. That's what Apple should have done if it were a decent entity and not itself the enemy of our freedom. So when the users found ways to break the censorship, they called it jailbreaking, which means they recognized that this product was designed to be a jail for users. And that's our term for products that censors application, installation of apps. They're jails. Windows has a universal backdoor. That means Microsoft can forcibly change the software at a distance, installing any code it wants to. This means that the poor sucker who's using Windows is totally at the mercy of Microsoft. This backdoor is universal in the same way a computer is universal. Give it the right code and it will do anything you want. Install the right modifications into Windows, and it will do any nasty thing to the user that you want. There's also a universal backdoor in the modem processor of a portable phone. And that's used to convert the phone into a listening device that listens all the time and transmits all the time. And they also modify it so it won't really shut off. Turns out the phone doesn't have an off switch. It just has a button that says, "Oh, sir, telephone, would you please switch yourself off?" But once it's been modified into a listening device, it only pretends to switch off. It really keeps running and listening and transmitting all the conversations in the room. So put this together with the fact that the portable phone tracks people as they move around town, and you end up with two horrible surveillance functionalities. That's why I call the portable phone Stalin's dream. A portable phone is exactly what Stalin would have wanted to give to every inhabitant of the Soviet Union, except that the technology didn't exist. Well, sad to say, now it does exist, and most people have surrendered to pressure to carry mobile phones, but not me. I absolutely refuse. I don't have one, and I won't carry someone else's. I do talk through and occasionally text through other people's phones, but those are different people, usually a different person every time, someone I don't know who doesn't know me. Now, sometimes one program does many of these malicious things at the same time. Consider the Netflix app. Since it makes users subscribe, it keeps track of what each person watches. That should be illegal. No store, no app should be permitted to keep track of such things about people. You should go to prison if you try to set up such a scheme. And it has DRM, the chains, digital handcuffs, and it makes the users agree to an anti-socializing contract. We speak of socializing children, teaching them to help other people, to be good members of society. This contract does the exact opposite. It makes you commit not to cooperating with other people. It says that you promise not to share copies, not to even lend the one copy you have, not to give the one copy you have to someone else. It says you promise to be a jerk. Well, if you have agreed to a contract like that, that doesn't excuse acting like a jerk. Your obligations to the rest of society take priority. You're obligated to violate the contract. But I don't like agreeing to a contract and then violating it, so I decided never to agree to them. I have never knowingly agreed to a contract of this kind because I've been checking for them since the 1980s. Oh, and by the way, when Microsoft finds out about a security hole in Windows, it shows the NSA first, and then it fixes the security hole, directly betraying all of its clients. We know Microsoft does this. The press has published about it. As for other companies, we have no evidence. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. We can't assume other companies don't do the same. We just have no evidence that they do so. So basically, using proprietary software is being dragged behind the vehicle. And by the way, any program can be distributed as free software, or as non-free software, or as both in parallel, because free versus non-free is not a matter of what's in the code. It's a matter of how it's made available to users. By contrast, malware versus honest is just a matter of what's in the code. So in theory, those two are independent. Whether it's free or non-free, whether it's malware or not, they're independent. But in practice, they're correlated. Free software is almost always honest, and proprietary software tends to be malware. And this is because the proprietary software developers have power and they know it, and the power corrupts them. And since we can't check it, we have no rational basis to trust that code. It's blind faith or nothing. And usually it's blind faith in a company that already proved it doesn't deserve the faith. Whereas with free software, we have a rational basis to trust it, which is we know the user community controls that program, and we know the user community will get rid of malicious functionalities because it doesn't want to be mistreated. This is the only way we can have a rational basis to trust a program. So using proprietary software is asking to be taken advantage of. Don't do it. For more examples of proprietary malware, look at gnu.org/malware. There are lots of them. So for freedom, you need to escape and come to the free world that we built with the GNU operating system and the kernel Linux. I started GNU in 1984. By 91, it was almost complete. Only the kernel was missing. In 91, Torvalds wrote his kernel Linux, but it was non-free software. He made it free in 92, and that made it possible to make a complete free system by putting Linux together with GNU. Unfortunately, of the thousands of distros of GNU, most of them are not free because they contain some non-free programs, and all it takes is one to start denying your freedom. So look at gnu.org/distros for more information. You can choose a free distro that way. There are around 10 of them. The rest, as far as we know, are all non-free. And by the way, if there's only free software installed on your computer, that doesn't mean you're running only free software. Many web pages come with non-free software, and they insist that the users run that if they want to see what's in the page. Well, I won't run non-free software, and that includes what comes in web pages. We have developed the program LibertyJS. It's an add-on for Firefox, and it detects whether the JavaScript code is either free or trivial. In those cases, it can run. By the way, there's a gross bug in the currently released version, but it's been fixed already. It should get installed today or tomorrow with the latest, and then you'll have a version that does generally work. So I never browse except through LibertyJS unless I have some other reason to be very confident that a site is okay. Oh shit. Someone else set this up and didn't use the right site. Why did you use jit.c? We can't trust them.
Yes, I checked the code.
Oh, you checked it?
I compared it with the one we...
Oh, okay. So Ruben actually he checked the JavaScript code and he verified it really is free software, even though it's not labeled, so it's not immediately detectable, but we know it is. Okay, we know it's free, so there's no reason we shouldn't run it. But really, in your website, you should label the free code with a free license in a way that LibertyJS can see. And that way, the visitors, when they visit your site, they can tell automatically that you're sending them free software. Everybody developing a website should make sure it doesn't ask people to run any non-free JavaScript code. There's another way you can lose control of your computing. If a service invites you to send it the job and it'll do your computing job for you, well, you lose control of how that job is done. And it probably collects personal information, which it shouldn't be doing. The right way to do your own computing job is by running a free program in your own computer. That's the only way you have control over that activity. If you do it with a non-free program in your computer, you don't have control. And if you entrust it to somebody else's server, you don't have control. It's the server owner that controls what that server does. So we call this service as a software substitute, and it's automatically bad for you. So when it's your own computing activity, never entrust it to a server. Some of the activities we do are not personally ours. They're shared activities involving other people. There's no way to do a shared activity inside your own computer without communication. We've got to use the internet. We have to go through computers belonging to neither to you nor to me if we're going to make your computer talk with mine. So the SaaS issue, service as a software substitute, applies when you're doing your own personal computing activity that in principle is nobody else's business. So one of the obstacles to our freedom is the term open source. That term was coined in 1998, 14 years after the start of developing GNU, and the purpose was to disconnect our free software from the free software movement and its ideals of freedom. They wanted to encourage the programs and forget about freedom. The word open doesn't refer to freedom. By using the term open source, you help bury our ethical ideals. But if you say free software or svobodny software, then you are telling people about freedom and you're encouraging people to think about freedom. This is the most basic choice you can make. Most people say open source. The media usually say open source, and this discourages people from thinking about freedom. We have to work very hard to encourage them and spread the word. Please help us. Above all, schools should teach only free software, because teaching a non-free program is implanting dependence in the children. And that's the opposite of what a school should do. A school has a social mission. Teaching people to use a non-free system or non-free application is like teaching them to smoke tobacco. So the school should not only teach only free software, it should say why. That this is because of its civic duty. By the way, they'll tell you where you can download the whole file of images. And we also need the school to teach people to cooperate, to share with each other. So the class has to have a rule. If you bring software here, you've got to share it with the rest of the class, including the source code. So it's not permitted to bring a proprietary program to this class. But the school has to set a good example by doing the exact thing that it requires the students to do. There's also teaching people to be good programmers. They need examples of large programs that they can study, and then they can try changing them, fixing bugs and adding features. That's the way you learn to be good at working on large programs. And if you don't have large programs to work to start with, you're handicapped. Human rights depend on each other. If we lose one human right, it becomes harder to defend the others. Now that so much of our activities in life depend on software, free software has become one of the essential human rights for defending other human rights. Free software, of course, stands for having control of our own computing activities, both our individual ones and those of society. And that sometimes requires a sacrifice. That's life. If you won't make a sacrifice for your freedom, you're going to lose it. Of course, once you love freedom enough, it doesn't look like you're making a sacrifice for your freedom. It's the opposite. Somebody's inviting you to sacrifice your freedom for some convenience, and of course you won't do that. The idea sounds outrageous when it's suggested to you. You might even get angry that somebody suggests it to you. So how do you help our cause? Well, if you're good at programming, participate in free software development. I suggest you work in 15 projects run by others before you start your own. That way, when you do start your own, you'll know how to do a good job. But most people are not good at programming, so do something else. There are lots of ways to help us. For instance, organize the movement. Start a free software activist group and keep it running. Invite speakers to the meetings and plan protests and other activities that are going to promote the cause. Or become a free software speaker. Give talks like this one. Persuade schools and governments to move to free software. Regarding schools, look at gnu.org/education. Regarding governments, look at gnu.org/government for a list of suggested policies to move a government gradually to free software. If your government's using Windows, that means Microsoft can sabotage it at any time. That's lunacy. But in general, running a non-free program in the state means that the state is failing to carry out its responsibility to the people. The state does its computing for the people, and its responsibility is to maintain full control of that. If it uses a proprietary program or if it uses service as a software substitute, it has abandoned that control. It is failing in its responsibility. And if it uses non-free software in an agency with a critical function, that endangers national security. If you're an expert user, help other users. Start a GNU/Linux user group or join an existing one and help users there. If there's an existing GNU/Linux user group, but it makes the mistake of calling itself a Linux user group and thus giving the credit for our work to Mr. Torvalds, who did a substantial share, but not as much, and he started later. Well, go there and help other users and explain that the organization really should change its name and call itself a GNU/Linux user group. And the most basic way to help us is by saying free software. Every time you say free software, you help our movement. Every time you say open source, you sort of work against our movement. You help it to be forgotten, helping the people who want it to be forgotten, because freedom is not what they care about. So please think about that. And then in gnu.org/help, you can see lots more ways to help us. There are dozens of different kinds of work we need. Surely one of them fits your skills and your inclinations. So please take a look and then offer to help one way or another. In gnu.org/philosophy, you'll find lots of articles about philosophical and political questions related to free software. In gnu.org/licenses, you'll find everything about free software licenses, which licenses are free, what's good or bad about them, how we recommend you choose a license, how to use the GNU GPL correctly. Nowadays, due to the bad influence of GitHub, lots of projects apply the GNU GPL, but do it wrong. In gnu.org/GNU, you'll find the history of GNU. In gnu.org/distros, you'll find all the info about which distros are free and problems with other distros, why they're not free. So I'm sorry, I've taken 44 minutes. I don't know if they want to allow a few minutes for questioning. I'd be happy to answer them, but what can I say?
Yes, thank you. That was excellent. I mean, I can feel the spirit of free software around the room. I mean, many people were sort of mesmerized, I think, by your talk. So thank you very much. I think you've made a lot of new fans in Bulgaria.
Well, actually, I don't want fans. Fans are for entertainers. I am a freedom fighter, and I want recruits. So Nowadays, it's not fighting the Turks. It's fighting GAFAM. Start making songs about fighting GAFAM, fighting proprietary software, fighting all the systems that track people and listen to people and recognize people, we're going to have to fight.
I think you're speaking to the right audience. I think we're all fighters, or at least some of us. But let's get a couple of questions from the audience, actually. So I have a hand raised over there. If we could have a microphone. And if you don't hear the question, I'll repeat it for you.
Okay. Hey, Richard. Thanks for joining us here in Bulgaria, even from a distance. We really appreciate it. So my question is kind of practical. It's really gorgeous how you speak about free software and everything, but how is it actually feasible to make the regular user use free software when nowadays we're really dependent on our mobile phones and other gadgets which are really usable? And in practicality, free software, albeit being free, it's not as useful as Windows or Mac or whatever.
Well, now we see that if you want freedom, you're going to have to make practical sacrifices. Of course, that may seem uncomfortable, so people tend to exaggerate how hard they are. People say it's impossible. Well, if it were really impossible, how could I be doing it? I do it because I'm stubborn. I don't want to give up my freedom. Not only that, I've maintained my freedom for so many years that if I surrendered it now, what a shame that would be. I'd be really ashamed to have given up. So basically, I just don't give up. You can learn to do without those things. Anyone who is, say, more than 40 years old knew how to live without a portable phone, and then probably saw the portable phones and thought, oh, how convenient, I'll start using this, and didn't even raise the question of what nasty things it was doing to them. Well, I'm slow to adopt new technology because I'm always suspicious. And when I thought about whether to have a mobile phone around 15 or so years ago, I inquired and I found out the nasty things it does. And I said, no thanks. I'm not going to touch one of those except for a minute or so if they don't know who I am.
Thank you, and that actually sounds similar to what one of the previous speakers said, which was just switch the off button and abstain. That's the only way out. I mean,
it's the main way out. But also, to some extent, we can make it easier to stop using non-free software by improving the free software. That's the way to understand the GNU system. I wanted to stop using proprietary software. Well, the obvious way was don't use computers anymore. In 1983, when I made this decision, most people didn't have or use computers that had never seen one. But I would have had to find something else I could do, and I would have missed programming. So instead, I thought, I will stop using non-free software by developing free replacements. And then I'll be able to continue using computers and have freedom. In other words, instead of fleeing into exile, I decided to fight for the freedom of my home. Fleeing into exile is perfectly honorable when your home is conquered and subjugated by a tyranny. It's not something to be ashamed of, but if you can stand and liberate your home, that's much better.
Great. Any other questions from the audience? We have a hand raised over here.
Hello. I have a question because the first part of our program today was about the blockchain technology. So what do you think about the blockchain technology? Do you think that really it's an alternative of the big companies, or actually it's a technology that is going to be used by the same big companies that are now dominating?
It's probably both, but I should point out that it's a mistake to think of blockchain as an alternative to anything as big as everything the big companies do. It's a technique. It's a technique that will be good for some things. But we do have to keep in mind that the way it's used in Bitcoin it doesn't give people privacy. Maybe there are ways to adapt it so that it does give people privacy. And there are some applications for which privacy is not important, like if it's keeping track of the provenance of various physical objects so as to keep slavery out of your supply chain. I've met people who are working on that. It's a fine thing. But you see, it turns out that components that are meant for manufacturing are not persons, and they're not entitled to human rights, and so it doesn't matter if they don't have privacy.
Well, that's an excellent point, actually. Digital identity as applied to physical objects is not as sensitive to privacy issues as it is for human beings.
As long as they don't identify who the thing gets sold to. So they can identify everything in the supply chain to make the product, but when you buy it, you should pay cash.
And do you have any comments, the question around zero-knowledge proofs as used in Zcash and similar system has come up. Do you have any comments on that?
I don't know anything about those. I really don't know. I'm not an expert in that field, and I don't have time to become one.
No worries. No one's perfect. Any final questions before we move on? Yes, we have a hand raised over there.
Hello, and thanks for joining the event in Sofia. I'm curious about how do you search on the internet? Do you use any kind of search engine? Because as we know, the biggest one and the others are owned by the big corporations. Thank you.
Well, the ethical issues about a search engine are different from the ethical issues about a program. A program is something you can have a copy of and make more copies of, and you can run it. If you use a search engine, well, you're probably using a browser to talk to it, but the search engine itself is not something you can download. Maybe in some cases the code of the engine you could download and in principle run it, but you don't have the server farm necessary to go spidering a large fraction of the web. What you're talking about is using a service. Services raise different ethical issues from programs because they're fundamentally a different kind of thing. So we must never mix them up. And that's why the term web application is confusing, because it's talking about a program that might get sent to your browser and a service. And these two raise different kinds of ethical issues. So to think about it, you have to separate the two and look at which issues are raised by each one. Now, let's look at Google. Let's first look at search engines and what ethical issues they raise. One is, does it send code to your machine and require you to run that? If so, there's the free software issue for that code. Second, does it allow you to talk to it? Or does it make you log in? Does it allow you to connect through Tor? The next thing is, if it figures out who you are, does it learn about you and profile you and collect data about your actions? And finally, what biases does it have? Is there a side of life that it doesn't want to show you? The people who run the World Socialist website report that Google searches don't go there very much anymore as of, I think, about a year ago, April. Now, this is not an organization that advocates violence. They have a political position, and it's wrong for Google to be biased against them if, in fact, it is. We can say that regardless of to what extent we agree or disagree with their views. Now, at present, Google search does not allow people to connect through Tor. I used to use Google search as a last resort, but now I can't because I only browse through Tor and Google just says, get lost.
Okay, thank you.
I take various precautions to stop search engines from knowing who I am, because IceCat blocks lots of tracking tags. We may need to update its list, but it's blocking that. It blocks fingerprinting constructs, and it blocks the JavaScript, which is often malicious itself and intended to spy on people.
Thank you for those final insights. It's been great having you with us here for the past almost 1 hour. We are pressed on time, so we do need to move on. So thank you once again, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye.